Lionel Richie started reading the letter. His voice trembled. He stopped mid-sentence. And Jimmy Fallon froze completely because that letter was revealing a 40-year-old secret. It was a Thursday night in October 2023. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Studios 6A at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. The audience was buzzing with excitement. Lionel Richie, musical legend, icon of soul and pop, was the guest. Everyone expected stories about his legendary career, maybe a performance, definitely some laughs. Jimmy was in his element. The interview was flowing perfectly. Lionel was charming, funny, telling stories about the Commodores, about writing. Hello? About his decades in the music industry. The audience was loving it. The Roots were grooving quietly in the background. The cameras captured every smile, every laugh. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then a production assistant walked onto the stage. She approached quietly, apologetically, carrying a simple white envelope. She leaned down and whispered something to Jimmy. He looked confused, glanced at the envelope, then at Lionel. Lionel, Jimmy said, his casual host voice tinged with uncertainty. Apparently someone left this for you at the studio entrance today. They said it was important. Do you want to? Lionel took the envelope, his expression curious. He turned it over in his hands. No return address. Just his name written in careful handwriting on the front. He opened it slowly, pulling out a single sheet of paper covered in handwritten text. Should I read it? Lionel asked, looking at Jimmy. I mean, if you want to. We can wait until after the show if it's... No, it's okay. Lionel unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the first line. Then the second. His smile faded. His hands started to shake. He began reading aloud. Dear Lionel, you don't know me, but you saved my father's life in 1983. His voice cracked on the word. Life. He stopped. Swallowed hard. Tried to continue. You saved my father's life and you never knew it. His name was Michael Chen. He was a surgeon in San Francisco. And on the night of November 12, 1983, he was going to... Lionel couldn't finish the sentence. His hands were trembling so violently the paper rattled. Tears were streaming down his face. He lowered the letter to his lap and covered his mouth with one hand. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. The audience fell into complete silence. The Roots stopped moving. Questlove's hands hovered above his drums. Jimmy's blue note cards slipped from his fingers and scattered across his desk, forgotten. Lionel? Jimmy's voice was soft, concerned, all traces of his performative energy gone. Are you okay? We can stop. We don't have to. Lionel shook his head. He picked up the letter again with both hands, his fingers gripping the edges like it might disappear if he let go. No, he whispered. I need to read this. I need to understand. He took a shaky breath and continued, his voice barely steady. On the night of November 12, 1983, my father was going to kill himself. The studio didn't just go quiet. It went silent in a way that felt sacred. 300 people holding their collective breath. He was 42 years old. Lionel read, his voice thick with emotion. He was a surgeon. He saved lives every day. But he'd lost 2 patients that week, a child during a routine surgery, and a young mother in the emergency room. He couldn't forgive himself. He couldn't see past the grief. He wrote goodbye letters to my mother and me. I was 7 years old. I was asleep in my room. He was in his car in our garage with the engine running. Jimmy's hand was covering his mouth. His eyes were glistening. Lionel continued, tears falling freely now, his voice breaking with almost every word. But then your song came on the radio. All night long it was playing in the car. And my father told me. Years later, when I was old enough to understand, that he heard your voice and something in him broke open. The joy in that song. The pure celebration of being alive. He said it reminded him that there was still music in the world. That there was still joy somewhere, even if he couldn't feel it in that moment. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Lionel had to stop again. He was crying too hard to speak. Jimmy stood up from his desk, something he almost never did during interviews, and moved to sit on the edge of his desk closer to Lionel, his own tears visible now. He turned off the car. Lionel read, forcing himself through the words. He went back inside the house. He woke up my mother. He told her everything. And he got help. Real help. Therapy. Support. He learned to forgive himself for the patients he couldn't save and to honor the hundreds he did save. Lionel's hands were shaking so badly now that the letter was hard to read. He squinted at the handwriting, his voice raw. My father died last month. He was 82 years old. He lived 40 years longer than he planned to on that November night. In those 40 years, he performed over 3,000 successful surgeries. He taught at UCSF Medical School. He walked me down the aisle at my wedding. He held his grandchildren. He lived a full, beautiful life. The audience was crying now. Not quietly. People were sobbing openly, holding each other, completely absorbed in this moment. Before he died, Lionel continued, he made me promise to find you. To tell you this story. To let you know that your music, your joy, your gift, saved his life. You never knew Michael Chen. You never met him. But your voice reached into his darkness and pulled him back. Lionel finished reading the letter. He sat holding it in his lap, his shoulders shaking with sobs. The studio was so quiet that the only sound was people crying. Jimmy stood up fully now and walked over to Lionel's chair. He knelt down beside it, the host of The Tonight Show, on his knees on live television, next to one of music's greatest legends who was falling apart. Lionel, Jimmy said quietly, placing a hand on the musician's shoulder. I'm so sorry. I had no idea what was in that letter. Are you okay? Lionel looked at Jimmy with red, swollen eyes. I've been making music for 50 years, he said, his voice hoarse. I've had #1 hits. I've won Grammys. I've performed for millions of people. But I never knew I saved someone's life. I never knew that all night long, a song about dancing and celebrating, could be the thing that brings someone back from the edge. He looked down at the letter again. Her name is Sarah Chen. She's the daughter. She came to New York just to deliver this to the studio. She's in the audience tonight. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Jimmy stood up and turned to face the studio audience. Sarah Chen? Are you here? A woman in her late 40s stood up slowly in the third row. She was crying, clutching a tissue, her face a mirror of the same raw emotion everyone in the studio was feeling. Can you come up here? Jimmy asked gently. Sarah made her way down the aisle, her legs shaking, people in the audience reaching out to touch her arm supportively as she passed. She climbed onto the stage, and Lionel Richie, without hesitation, stood up and wrapped her in an embrace. They held each other while the audience watched, while cameras rolled, while millions of people at home witnessed this moment of grief and gratitude, and the impossible weight of understanding that a song can save a life. Thank you, Sarah whispered into Lionel's shoulder, loud enough for the microphones to catch. Thank you for giving me 40 more years with my father. Thank you for your joy. Thank you for your music. Lionel was crying too hard to speak. He just held her tighter. Jimmy stood nearby, wiping his own tears with the back of his hand. The Roots sat motionless. The audience was standing now, not applauding yet, just standing, bearing witness to something too profound for noise. Finally, Lionel pulled back from Sarah. He held her face in his hands the way a father might hold a daughter. What did your father do? Lionel asked, his voice cracking. In those 40 years? Tell me about him. Sarah smiled through her tears. He saved so many lives. He specialized in pediatric surgery. He said every child he helped was his way of honoring the child he lost that night in 1983. He said your song reminded him that joy and grief could exist together. That you could celebrate life even while mourning loss. Lionel turned to look at Jimmy, then at the audience. I wrote All Night Long as a party song. Just something to make people dance. To make them feel good. I never imagined. He couldn't finish. Jimmy picked up the letter from where Lionel had left it on the chair. He held it carefully, reverently. Lionel, Jimmy said quietly, can I do something? Anything. Jimmy walked back to his desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out a simple black frame, the kind used for important documents. He placed Sarah's letter inside the frame carefully, his hands steady despite the tears on his face. This letter, Jimmy said, addressing the studio and the cameras, is going to stay here. In this studio. As a reminder that what we do here, the music, the laughter, the moments we share, matters more than we know. That joy isn't trivial. That celebration isn't shallow. That sometimes a song about dancing all night long is exactly what someone needs to choose life. He handed the framed letter to Lionel. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Lionel Richie stood up. He walked over to the Roots. He spoke quietly to Questlove, who nodded, his own face wet with tears. The band members picked up their instruments. Lionel turned to face the audience, to face the cameras, to face Sarah standing on the stage with him. Sarah, he said, this is for your father. This is for Michael Chen. This is for every person who's ever been pulled back from darkness by something as simple and as powerful as music. And right there, on the Tonight Show stage, with no rehearsal, no preparation, Lionel Richie began to sing. All night long. But it wasn't the party version. It was slow. Tender. Filled with so much emotion that every word felt like a prayer. The Roots played softly behind him, their instruments creating something beautiful and broken and perfect. The audience didn't dance. They swayed gently, arms around each other, crying and healing and witnessing something that transcended television. Jimmy stood at the side of the stage, one arm around Sarah Chen, both of them crying as they watched Lionel pour 40 years of unknowing gratitude into every note. When the song ended, the studio erupted. Not in party applause, but in that deep, cathartic applause that comes when people have been changed by what they've witnessed. Everyone standing. Everyone crying. Everyone understanding that they just watched television become something more than entertainment. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The framed letter stayed in Studio 6A. Jimmy had it mounted on the wall behind his desk where he could see it during every show. Beside it, he placed a small plaque that read, Dr. Michael Chen, November 12, 1983, All Night Long, Joy Saves Lives. Sarah Chen became a regular presence at Lionel Richie concerts. He always dedicated All Night Long to her father. Always sang it with that same tender emotion he discovered that night on The Tonight Show. And Jimmy Fallon? He never forgot that interview. He tells young comedians and musicians the same story. Your work matters more than you know. Your joy reaches further than you can see. Never underestimate the power of making someone feel alive. The night the episode aired, suicide prevention hotlines reported a 300% increase in calls, not from people in crisis, but from people calling to say thank you. To say a song had saved them too. To say they weren't alone. 3 months after that episode aired, Lionel Richie received a package at his home. Inside was a photograph, Dr. Michael Chen in his surgical scrubs, standing with a young patient who had just recovered from heart surgery. The child was smiling, holding a small radio. On the back of the photo, in Dr. Chen's handwriting, was a note dated 1995. Every life I save, I hear your voice. Every child who walks out of this hospital, I remember November 12, 1983. Music is medicine. Joy is survival. Thank you, Lionel Richie, for teaching me that grief and celebration can dance together. Lionel had the photograph framed and placed it in his recording studio. When reporters asked him about his greatest achievement, he stopped mentioning Grammy Awards. He started talking about Dr. Michael Chen. About Sarah. About the letter that changed everything. Jimmy Fallon kept his promise. Every new host who worked in Studio 6A was told the story. The framed letter became part of Tonight Show legend. A reminder that behind every joke, every song, every moment of laughter, there might be someone in the audience holding on by a thread, waiting for permission to choose life one more time. Sarah Chen now works as a music therapist at UCSF Medical Center, in the same hospital where her father practiced. She plays all night long for patients in their darkest moments. She tells them her father's story. She reminds them that survival can sound like a song.